moving in, it's like, hey, it's great that they're offering incentives. It's great that you might be able to get a deal on this or get them to budge, but you always have to keep in mind, okay, once I move into this neighborhood and I'm a homeowner now, I'm fully vested in the valuations of these other homes that are selling. What are there any indications that they're going to be kind of just a free for all, or there's going to be issues with hurting my equity and my home's valuation after I move in? So that was one of those things where I was aware of it, but I had never seen it to that extent, and that definitely makes me a lot more cautious about it. Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. This week's episode, I wanted to take a little bit of time to reflect on some of the past deals I've had and lessons that can be gleaned from some of those experiences. As I mentioned this before, but one of my prior mentors in the business, one of the first things they told me about real estate transactions and deals is that every single transaction, you should be learning something new. And this particular mentor even went so far as to say, if a realtor ever tells you that they did a transaction, and if at the end of that transaction, if you were to ask them, what did you learn new? If they can't tell you something that they learned new in that deal, they're either A, lying to you, or B, they weren't paying close enough attention. Right, so every deal, every transaction is going to be different in some capacity. There's so many different variables that go into every deal. There's no way that you can expect for every deal to work out exactly the same way. Now, there's usually similar steps involved, but there's different players, there's different houses, there's all kinds of things that can change what you can learn or what lesson you can get from each and every transaction that you're involved in. And so I always go into a deal or a transaction looking for what's the thing that I can be learning in the midst of this deal. And not only what's the thing that I can learn, but how can this help me become a better agent and be able to better assist the people that I'm going to help in the future. And so this particular episode, I wanted to focus on what are kind of the top 5 lessons that I've learned from transactions I've had just in the past year. I didn't want to go through like the entirety of my career, but I felt like this was a good way to just kind of get a recap on like what are some recent things that I've learned. Some of them are very important things, some of them are big things, some of them are kind of expanding on things that I somewhat knew before, but really have a better understanding of now, right? Because again, every single transaction, there's always something that I can be learning to improve my skills. This business is constantly changing, constantly evolving, and I'm sure there will be a ton of other new things that I'm continuing to learn as this business goes on, even with the market continuing to change as well. And so I wanted to take time to walk through just the top 5 things and give you a little bit of background on the story that led to that, and then the lesson that I felt was the good one to kind of go through. And so as I was looking through deals and past transactions as well, one of the things that I've noticed is in regard to new construction. So I had a new construction deal that happened last year, and everything went well with the closing. It closed on time and as planned and everything like that. But one of the unique things about this particular one, and this was sort of a sign that the market was really beginning to change last year and really beginning to shift, particularly for builders, is that this particular neighborhood was offering a ton. And when I say a ton, I mean tens of thousands of dollars in concessions. We were seeing $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of concessions that the builder was offering to buyers who purchased homes in this neighborhood, and saying, hey, if you use our preferred lender and our preferred attorney, we'll give you all these concessions. And usually I'm a little bit wary of deals like that, because sometimes there may be situations where the person that they're asking for you to use, or their preferred person, may be charging higher than normal fees, whatever, and that kind of offsets some of the incentives they're offering. In this situation, they were offering such astronomical high figures that even my preferred lenders, they were even saying there's no way I can beat that, right? Like I said, even if you do have a bad experience with them, which they definitely had a less than stellar experience with this person, but even then they were still saying like, there's no way we can beat what they're offering in those incentives, right? And so that was one thing that really stuck out to me, is that I had seen builder incentives before, but not to this extent or not to that level. And then on top of that, we also noticed that there was a lot of other surrounding inventory that they were struggling to sell. And that is definitely something that I have learned now more than ever. That is something you really need to pay attention to, because when you're moving into those properties as well, one of the bigger reasons that builders prefer to do closing costs or concessions instead of just lowering the price if something's struggling to sell is because they want to help keep those housing values elevated, right? So they're like, hey, if we can keep the price here but give you maybe some additional funds on the back end to kind of help you lower your rate or something, that helps both of us, right? Where it helps keep the values of our houses at a certain level, which is what you want as a homeowner, but also it allows you to feel like you were able to get a deal or get like some incentives that help you out as the buyer as well. And so you want the builders to go that route instead of just lowering the price, but you have to still be very aware of what their current inventory is looking like. And in this particular situation, we noticed, even while we were still under contract, the buyer was noticing that there were some of the houses in the area that were starting to have price reductions, right? And they were still offering those same incentives. And that's something you really have to be careful about, because, again, you don't want to be in the position where you are purchasing the home in this neighborhood or in this area, and then once you move in, then you start noticing that the prices start to plumb to come down a little bit lower. Now, they kind of reached a point where they were a little stagnant as well, but that has made me hyper aware moving forward of new construction communities I'm moving in. It's like, hey, it's great that they're offering incentives. It's great that you might be able to get a deal on this or get them to budge, but you always have to keep in mind, okay, once I move into this neighborhood and I'm a homeowner and I'm fully vested in the valuations of these other homes that are selling, what are there any indications that they're going to be kind of just a free-for-all, or there's going to be issues with hurting my equity and my home's valuation after I move in? So that was one of those things where I was aware of it, but I had never seen it to that extent, and that definitely makes me a lot more cautious about it moving forward. Another deal I had last year was a very unique, and I did an episode kind of talking a little bit more in depth about this, but off-market sales, right? So these are properties that are sold or purchased, and they are not put into the MLS, right? So these are properties that are sold. Maybe the buyer and seller came to an agreement outside of that, or they made terms and agreements and kind of have a realtor working with them. But this one in particular, there was a very specific neighborhood in an area that the buyer was trying to move to. And so they had, or one of the neighbors sent out a message or a letter to everyone in that community. They had like a message board that they shared and sent out a message to all of them saying, hey, is there anyone who's interested in selling their house? Right. Just to see who was out there. And actually a couple of people kind of raised their hand. They went toward those two properties. They really liked one of them, wrote an offer on it, and that ended up being the house that they purchased. Right. And so that one kind of gave me an idea of like how it works as far as just not the standard. It doesn't always have to be the traditional way of you looking at just the available houses that are for sale. Now, obviously, I knew that it was always an option for you to ask that, but that was the first time where I'd ever had it actually pan out, right? Usually what ends up happening is people will send those messages out. Someone will raise their hand, say, I'm looking to buy, but their house is in such poor condition or something like that, where it's like the buyer ends up not being interested in it at all. That's 90% of the time, that's what usually ends up happening in most situations that I've encountered. That was one of the few where I was like, oh, wow, this actually worked. We sent out the letters. Someone raised their hand. We made the deal. Like they didn't have a realtor, so it was basically like working with a for sale by owner. And so I kind of had to structure it, and that was very unique. And I kind of got a feel for like, okay, how do I explain how a transaction works to a seller without also hindering or hurting my buyer's bargaining position, right? It's a very tightrope, delicate balance, but one of the advantages to having an off-market sale like this is that it gave me the ability to learn how to better walk that tightrope. But again, it was just a further sign to me that it never hurts to check and see, right, who all is in the neighborhood, who's available. And moving forward, if I ever have buyers who are having a very particular or specific set of criteria that they're looking for, there's nothing wrong with me just reaching out and seeing what's available in the community. It very well could work out, especially after having gone through this deal. That's definitely something that I'm going to use my tool belt for later on. The third lesson is the communication that typically happens amongst the buyer and seller. So in most cases, the buyer and the seller are usually communicating through their agents, right? Their agents are the ones that are kind of handling all the communication back and forth because, as we've said before, residential real estate is incredibly emotional. There's a lot of things that are going into it, and you don't want those emotions to hinder the deal from actually happening or cause any unnecessary issues in the course of dealings. And there was one transaction that I had last year where usually you will have repair negotiations happen where the buyer will submit a repair request. The seller will say, hey, we'll have all this thing set up and we're willing to do that. And they kind of go back and forth and land on a certain list of items or a certain set of repairs that they're willing to do. In this particular deal, the seller was almost like a Tim the Toolman Taylor type, right? Where it's like their garage had been completely decked out and turned into almost a workshop, right? Like they didn't park the cars in there at all. Like it was completely set up for them to do all kinds of woodworking and projects and skills. It looked like a professional woodworking workshop in that garage. Like every space, they had all the organization, all the tools set up, the workbench, everything was in there. And so anytime I see that as an agent, that lets me know, okay, this is more than likely going to be someone who is not going to call a licensed contractor to make repairs on stuff in their house. They're going to be the ones to kind of go through and do everything. And so the way that it showed itself in this particular situation is that when they received the inspection report, instead of taking it like a normal seller would take it, where it's like, oh, okay, these are things they found wrong in the house, let's see what we can address. They took it as a personal affront to their own skills and abilities, right? And they were saying almost like you're saying that I did all these things wrong or that these things are, and they kind of we hadn't even submitted a request. I just sent over the inspection report for them to review and say, hey, if there's anything you can speak to, let us know if there's any changes we can do. And the way that was responded by, and again, this is one thing that I learned after that point too, there's a better way that I could have worded that, right? So I sent it over to them saying like, hey, if there's anything you can speak to, please do so. That's what I do with all of my past deals. And it was always fine because they were like, oh yeah, like we know about this particular leak and here's what's happened in the past, or hey, we don't know about this. But in this particular case, because it was a person who took a lot of pride in the repairs and upgrades and maintenance of their home, when they received their report and that were like, hey, we want to see if there's anything you can speak to, it was almost like we were accusing them of like, hey, here's all the things you did wrong, speak to that. And so when they responded, they literally went through, we didn't ask him to do this, but they went through line by line of every single item on that inspection report and gave like a response to each and every item on that list. Stuff that the buyer wasn't even considering asking for. They spoke to everything on that inspection report, and the buyers even came back to me like, hey, is the seller okay? Because the way they responded to some of this stuff is, it sounds kind of like we're being accusatory and stuff like that, right? Like it was a very like a defensive response to everything. And that really kind of shifted and changed the way the repair negotiations went. Because again, people may not want to admit it, but the emotions of the buyer and the seller play a much larger factor than you will ever even consider or understand in most cases, right? And so it was very important for us to make sure that we did all we could do to kind of like bring the temperature back down, right? Say like, hey, we're not accusing you of saying like, hey, any of this stuff was done wrong. We just wanted to know like if there's certain things that we should focus on in the process of asking for certain repairs or certain things to be done, right? And so that kind of changed the way that I make sure that I'm mindful of what the seller is thinking of when we're submitting that repair request from the buyer. Fourth thing, this was going back to estate deals. So I've done several estate deals in the past, basically where it's someone's inherited a home that they're trying to sell. It's usually the kids that are trying to sell their parents' house after their parents have passed. And a lot of times there's situations where the person passed away and it was a surprise, and which meant that they likely didn't have a will in place, and so that adds a whole other myriad of issues that can happen because the state has a very specific ways that you have to do things when someone dies without a will. And so if there's no will in place, there's a lot of checks and balances, a lot of things that have to be worked through, have to be figured out. And so for me, one of the things that I learned in this particular deal or transaction, even though I was working on the seller side, in this particular deal, we had a situation where we got it under contract, we're going through the course of the deal, and then we found out maybe a week before closing that there were issues with the title work where the kids who inherited this house, they had done about 90% of what they needed to do to be able to get that title cleared and ready to go. They were still missing a 10%, but that 10% was going to delay the deal a few weeks for us to be able to close, right? And so that was or could have been potentially a really big issue. Now, fortunately for us in this instance, the buyer was able to hold on longer than normal. They were purchasing it, whatever, for someone else in their family, but they were able to hold off a little bit longer for that deal to give us time to get that title work and everything situated. But if they hadn't been able to wait that long, they could have very well, based on our contract, they could have come back and said, hey, not only do we want a full refund of our due diligence fee, but we also want you to make us whole with all the money that we've spent up to this point, right? So all the money they had spent on inspections, home inspection, radon, septic, all those inspections, they very well could have come back and said, hey, we're demanding to get those funds back because you can't give us clear title in the timeline that you said we would, right? And so it was one of those situations where it could have really gone left on us, and it almost did, but it didn't in that case. But for me, for future reference, right, there's always things that could pop up in a title that you just had no way of knowing as well. But whenever I'm working with a buyer nowadays, after seeing how that can play a factor, when I'm working with buyers now, if they're looking at a home that is the result of an estate, especially in a state where someone died without a will, that's going to be one of the first questions I ask when I'm dealing with an estate, is if I'm on the buyer's side and I'm reaching out to that agent to learn a little bit more about that house, one of the first questions I'm going to ask him is, hey, did the person who passed away, did they have a will in place who clearly named who's going to inherit this property? And if not, that's not to say that, like, okay, we're just going to run for the hills if they don't have one in place. But if they don't, that's usually a red flag or a sign to let me know, or let the buyers know, if there's no real flexibility on your timeline, this may not be the house for you, right? Because there's a very real possibility that we could run into something down the road that causes us to have to push this deal a little bit further out than expected. And if that happens, I don't want you to be in a situation where it's like my rental lease ends on this day. I have to be out. I don't have anyone nearby that I can stay with. If someone's in that type of situation or that type of tight timeline with the home, this may not be the house for you, right? And so those are things that I'm going to be looking at now, having gone through some estate deals and having gone through that particular one. And even though they had, like I said, done most of what they needed to do, there were still a couple of other things that just going through the court systems and all that stuff, those things typically take a little bit of time, right? And so that was a valuable lesson that I learned in that, in just helping my buyer clients decide whether or not a house is the right fit for them. The fifth lesson, and then now again, like I said, every deal I'm learning some lessons, right? These are just the top 5 that I felt for this past year that are really going to serve me better. And this kind of goes back a little bit to what I was talking about in the third one from this list, where I was referencing the emotions of the buyer and the seller, right? And so I had a listing last year where it was in a popular area. There were people interested in it. We got a couple of offers. There were certain things about the offers that they had received that weren't the best, right? Either the price was off or the timeline was a little long, but it was something that was manageable. It was something that the sellers could work with and stuff like that too. And there was one additional buyer that came into the mix, and they submitted a long email of questions, right? The agent even warned me like ahead of time, like, hey, like, I know this is a lot, but if they can provide any insight, we would greatly appreciate it, bro. It was one of those things where it was like, okay, this is a little excessive, right? Like, I feel like y'all are going like above and beyond to ask all these different questions, like what about this, and what was this, and what year was this, and does this replace, and does the HOA allow this? It was just a lot of homework for the seller to do. Now, the seller could have looked at that and said, you know what, I'm just going to go accept one of these other offers. I don't have time to deal with this. But to their credit, they actually went through the process of answering all those questions. And that answering those questions helped that buyer feel more at peace. And as a result, they wrote an offer that was better than the other offers that we had received. And it all worked out. The deal closed. Everything went great through the negotiation stuff because they'd had time to go through it. And so for me, that let me know from a buyer standpoint, you shouldn't be afraid to ask those questions, right? So for my buyer clients now, I tell them like, hey, don't feel bad if you want to kind of learn a little bit more about these properties. I just did an episode talking about how most buyers, when they tour a house, they're usually only in there for maybe 15 to 20 minutes, right? That's a short amount of time for you to make such a massive decision, right? You're essentially saying like, hey, I want to go under contract on this house. And even though you still have additional time to figure out whether or not you want to go through with the deal, you could lose several $1,000s if you decide to back out, right? If you compared it to dating or something like that, or getting engaged, imagine if you only had 20 minutes to talk to somebody and then you had to make a decision on whether or not you wanted to get engaged to them. Yes, you can easily break off the engagement, but at that time, you probably wasted who knows how much time, money on deposits, the emotional energy that you spent pouring into that relationship, right? And so if you would never do that, like it's a very unique process going through the purchase of a house. And so if someone sees a property in 20 minutes and they still have some hesitation and they have some additional questions, that should be normal, right? It should be something that's looked at as like, hey, this is completely fine or whatever. Like, it's all in the way that you present it. But I always want to let my buyers know, like, hey, we can do as much research as we possibly do, and there's still going to be a lot of question marks on this house. Just like if you were dating somebody, right? You could stalk their social media page. You could go and try and find out as much information as you could. You could ask those questions in that initial 20-minute meeting and or showing in this example. But at the end of the day, there's still a ton that you aren't going to know unless you come straight out and ask them, right? This is the same with the home. There's a lot of things that no matter how much research we do, there's some things you just will not know the answer to unless you just come right out and ask the seller, right? There's nothing wrong with asking those questions, especially if it helps you feel more confident. The market obviously going to dictate how extensive you can be with those questions, right? If this was 2021, they're not going to look at a laundry list of questions. They're just going to go with the other 40 offers that are submitted. But in a normal balanced market like what we're in right now, this is a great opportunity for you to really ask those questions and learn more. I'm seeing an increasing amount of buyers setting up second showings to see homes, stuff that I had never seen before. And that's one advantage to the market moving a little bit slower, is that now you have more time to feel at peace with the decision you're making, right? And so those are just 5 things that I felt were valuable lessons that I've learned and have helped me to give advice to buyers as they're going through their home search and things that they may want to keep in mind. And I hope that that's helpful for you. Again, I'm always trying to be a sponge and soak up as much knowledge as I can from each and every transaction. There are some things that are exciting and drama filled, and there's other things that are boring but still very important. And I want to learn it all as I can to kind of become a better agent and a more skilled agent to help you out as well. And so if you ever have any questions, I'm more than happy to go through with it, but I just wanted to run that through with you guys and kind of give you a little bit insight into the way that I view things in the deal. So I hope that's helpful for you all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week.